Bueno, primero que todo, darle las gracias a todos por tomar y aprovechar esta grandísima oportunidad que tenemos hoy en la noche con el doctor Kalish, que es uno de los principales representantes de la medicina funcional en los Estados Unidos. Él ha sido durante los últimos años una parte muy importante, digamos, también de mi educación. Perdón, de mi educación. Él ha sido mentor en entrenamientos muy específicos de medicina funcional que aplicamos acá en el país. El doctor Kalish también ha sido y es representante de la marca Designs for Health y esa es una de las razones por las cuales estamos aprovechando hoy todo su conocimiento. Realmente vale la pena escucharlo, hacerle las preguntas que ustedes deseen hacer. Vamos a dejar la parte de preguntas para el final. Las pueden escribir en el chat y con muchísimo gusto. El doctor Kalish tiene una gran trayectoria, tanto en consulta médica como en lo que ha sido el entrenamiento de los principales médicos de medicina funcional en los Estados Unidos. Fundó el Kalish Institute of Functional Medicine, como ustedes lo pueden ver aquí en la pantalla. Y entonces para nosotros es un gran orgullo tenerlo como presentador. Y como educador ya creo que es como la tercera o cuarta vez que el doctor nos acompaña. El día de hoy vamos a hablar de una manera bastante importante sobre lo que es el anti-aging y longevidad. Vamos a aprender aplicaciones clínicas de los suplementos que tenemos en el país. Y pues los dejo en manos de Dr. Dan. Dr. Dan, whenever you're ready, we're ready for you.
Okay. All right.
And,
Thank
and
you.
we'll go from there. ¿Ok?
Thank you so much.
Ok, nada más acuérdense por favor de tener los micrófonos apagados y las preguntas las van haciendo por el chat y al final entramos en la sesión de preguntas y respuestas.
Okay.
Listo.
And thank you, Dr. Chokus, for putting this on. I very much appreciate it.
Yes. Yes, you're very welcome.
I am devoted to Costa Rica. It's my life dream to come back there. So you and I are going to make these plans so I can come there all the time. So,
Yes,
and
you
in the
will.
meantime,
We'll work
dedicated to
together.
the, yeah, I really was inspired the last time I was there about just the way the country has organized itself and how you look at healthcare and education and it's something that we want to promote, and I think it's a natural fit to think about longevity in an environment like Costa Rica, where there's an emphasis on environmental sustainability and trying to make the world a better place. And we're trying to do that in longevity medicine. We're just trying to do that with the inside of the body. If you think of the inside of the body as like an ecosystem, we're trying to rehabilitate the ecosystem of the human body. That's kind of the goal here. And I think it's very similar actually to what's happened in terms of environmental destruction on the outside in the physical world, right? Where you see environmental toxins and all the different chemicals we dumped into the environment that have caused problems and deforestation, et cetera. And the same thing has happened internally, right? Where we have environmental toxins that are in our body. We have the microbiome itself, where the good bacteria have been destroyed. And we see these parallels between the inside and outside. And I think the major, sort of threat to human health are all the things inside our body that are wrong that we see in the external world too. So longevity, I'll talk just a little bit about, well, I think you already introduced me, so I'll skip this slide. And we'll talk a little bit about a systems approach to longevity. And so we're going to focus today on the cardiometabolic aspect of the problem, because at least in the United States, I'm not sure if this is true in Costa Rica too, but heart disease is the number one killer for sure. I think in the United States, it kills more people than all the different forms of cancer put together. So it's a good place to have as a foundation for establishing health and longevity to make sure that cardiometabolic health is in good shape. But then we also consider the gut and the brain and the hormones and detoxification systems as well. But today we're just going to focus on the cardiometabolic part. But eventually, once you learn how to do this whole system of functional medicine, you start to be able to juggle the cardiometabolic with the microbiome, with the toxins, with the hormones. But again, we're just going to focus on this first pillar today and get into detail on that. And we have these certification programs that I offer online. If any of you guys are interested in taking a class with us, you can reach out to my office and we can talk to you about the longevity courses. We have various discounts that are available for people that are taking this free webinar. So if you guys are interested, our next section on longevity is starting in November, and it's on hormones and the immune system. That's going to be the next one, all right? So let's think about cardiometabolic. And this is really the centerpiece, I think, for almost all longevity medicine. It's what's happening with the mitochondria. And in functional medicine, there's things you can do to treat mitochondrial problems that are just sort of general based on lifestyle recommendations and supplement recommendations. We'll talk about a bunch of the supplements in a minute. But then there's also lab testing that you can do to measure mitochondrial dysfunction. And you can do, and that usually I teach these programs in a way where there's non-lab based programs you can use and then lab-based programs. And I'm just going to introduce you to the idea of lab testing today. I know a lot of you aren't doing it yet, but it's kind of the next step, I think, in functional medicine acceptance is that not only to do the lifestyle medicine component of functional medicine, but also to learn how to interpret the labs. And that's really what we focus on at the Kalish Institute is teaching people how to interpret labs. And the lab testing is becoming very popular in the United States right now. Very, very popular. And I'm sure eventually it's going to become equally popular in your country too. So if you want to be a little ahead of the curve, you can learn how to interpret these labs now, and you'll be probably one of the first people in your area that knows how to do that. But the lab testing gives you insight into all these things that we talk about, which would be mitochondrial health, protein folding, how enzymes are working, what's happening with what we call the cell danger response. And we can get into a little more detail on that in a minute. So let's go past here. So the central concept and the biggest picture is that, and this is so obvious to say, but it's not really how we act in medicine in general, is that it's your cellular health that determines longevity. So what does that mean? It means that we need to understand how cells work and how we can protect cells and make sure that they're working really well. And there's some key components to every cell in the body that have to be working perfectly in order for you to be perfectly healthy, whether it's from a metabolic standpoint, for your blood vessels, for your heart, for your brain, any tissue in the body. Number one, we think about what actually defines the cell, which would be the membrane, right? The plasma membrane. And the membrane is obviously, if you didn't have a membrane, you wouldn't have a cell, right? And it's the phospholipid bilayer that creates all the communication for things coming into the cell, leaving the cell. It's impacting every major function in the different membranes, like in mitochondrial membranes. That's where all the enzymes are located that conduct energy transfers, all the citric acid cycle, Krebs cycle stuff, all that's happening within cell membranes. And so they're pretty important structures. And a lot of people have problems with their membranes. Why? Because they don't eat very well and they have a lot of inflammation and tissue damage, which causes problems with membranes. And so it's super simple. If you're doing lab testing, we measure something called lipid peroxides, which is a direct measure of lipids being oxidized or damaged. If you're not doing lab testing, you can simply use omega-3 supplements because it's the omega-3s that have an anti-inflammatory effect and they get into the membranes and help the membranes function properly. You can also protect cell membranes by using fat-soluble antioxidants that then would target the membrane in terms of protection. And the classic fat-soluble antioxidant that protects plasma membranes and mitochondrial membranes, all membranes, would be CoQ10. So CoQ10 is a fat-soluble antioxidant. The omega-3s are the fats themselves that go into the membranes to help them be more fluid and work better, have an anti-inflammatory effect to help protect the membranes as well. And so things like omega-3s and CoQ10 can make the membranes healthier, which leads to a healthier cell in general. The next item on this list here, DNA repair. You have to be able to repair any errors in DNA. You don't want abnormal DNA to replicate and cause problems. And again, there's a lab test marker we do for that called 8-OHDG. 8-OHDG is a direct measure of oxidative stress that's impacting your DNA. And the way that you can protect DNA, obviously, is with antioxidants Things like vitamin C doesn't have to be particularly complicated. It doesn't have to be particularly fancy in order to get the protection for DNA. And you can also measure the damage too. And I'll show you in a minute an example of one of these tests. You can see what they're like. Protein synthesis and the ability to produce new mitochondria, new enzymes is pretty critical, and that's relying upon free-form amino acids because we need these amino acids in order to make proteins. And if you don't have enough amino acids, you can have a problem. Of course, you can test amino acid levels as well. But in lieu of that, you can use free-form amino acid products. It could be as simple as something like a whey protein, or it can be complicated. There's more sort of specialized free-form amino acid formulas. But even something as basic as whey protein can get you the amino acids people need for cellular repair. We talked about antioxidants already a little bit, cellular regeneration, and then the hot topic, it would be inflammation and insulin resistance. So to the extent that the person becomes more and more insulin resistant, they are going to have more and more inflammation, more and more oxidative stress, and more damage to their mitochondria, their metabolism, the brain, the cardiovascular system, etc. And in a sense, you can see a direct parallel between the rise of insulin resistance and the rise of obesity and the rise of atherosclerosis and heart disease, high blood pressure, right? These two things are working in tandem together in a very specific way. Now, in terms of the testing, let me just show you really quickly here a sample test, just so you have a visual on what it's actually like. Let me pull one up here. And this is called an organic acids profile. I promise you I'm not going to review this whole lab because that's a whole nother 2-hour class, but I just want you to see what one looks like. So you're so intrigued that you start to order them. So this is an organic acids profile from Diagnostic Solutions. And you can see it measures all these things: energy and mitochondrial processing, nutrition, stress and mood. There's the marker there, 8-OHTG I was talking about. That's the marker that shows damage to DNA, oxidative damage to DNA. It's measuring, yeah, I'll show you here. This whole section on the Krebs cycle shows energy production and is an analysis of the mitochondria. Glycolysis, this section shows if there's insulin resistance that's present or not. We've got beta oxidation measured here. It's quite a sophisticated test. Okay, it takes a few months to learn how to interpret this, but once you learn how to interpret this, you're in very good shape. There's a series of markers here for oxidative stress. Let me show you those. Toxin exposure. Here we go, glutathione status. So glutathione is the master antioxidant that's going to protect your heart tissue, your blood vessels, etc. So all these things can be measured. And then if, for example, you have a problem with glutathione, you can take liposomal glutathione and eliminate the oxidative stress. Usually you wait around 6 months and then redo the test and see if the person's improved or not. So yes, just so you can see, there is a way to test for this with labs. So that would be under the category of metabolic and cellular health markers, the one I just showed. There's, of course, GI testing as well. And the one that's sort of famous in the United States right now that you guys have access to is called the GI map. It's become, in the last 5 years, the most dominant test in the entire functional medicine field in the United States, GI map, and it's directly available in Costa Rica quite easily. So that looks at the microbiome. And then we look at neurological markers through, again, the organic acids profile. And then you can measure things like dopamine metabolites, serotonin metabolites, etc., to look at problems like mood and depression and anxiety, those kinds of things. Okay. So now, with all that being said, even if you don't have a lab, it's pretty obvious that if the person is overweight, if they have high blood pressure, if they have a history of heart disease in their family, if they smoke cigarettes, if they're not exercising, that you want to work on cellular health, whether you have a lab assessment in front of you or not. And then here's a nice list of the different tissues that we want to protect and the nutrients that we would use for that effort. So I mentioned cell membranes earlier. So fatty acids, lipid peroxidation, those are the tests. We would test fatty acids, test for lipid peroxidation, and then supplement-wise to help solve the problem, phosphatidylcholine, CoQ10, vitamin E, omega-3s. Those are the things that we associate with healing and repairing the membrane. Okay? And then in terms of protein synthesis, so this is the way that we look at the body's ability to make new enzymes so the cell can run properly. you can test for things like methylation, you can test amino acids, I mentioned. And then on the treatment side, you can use amino acids like leucine, you can use magnesium as a supplement, zinc and folate. A lot of these nutrients you can find in a multivitamin as well, okay? And very strong reason. In fact, if you look at this list, like vitamin E, magnesium, zinc, folate, vitamin C, vitamin A, vitamin D, everything on this list that I just, vitamin B6, biotin, all those products are going to be found in a multi. So in general, in the way that we practice, or the way that I teach functional medicine in the US is we just put everybody on a multi because we cover all these bases quite easily with one product. And then depending on the lab testing or the history, we may augment that multi with, for example, some extra glutathione if their glutathione markers are low, or some extra vitamin C if we see problems with the DNA being damaged, etc. So there's quite a bit you can get done here in terms of reversing problems. If you're working off more standard blood work and you're not doing the functional medicine testing yet, you can certainly do things like look at glucose levels, maybe look at a fasting insulin level, look at liver markers on a lab. Uh, let's see what else are there. Oh, cholesterol, of course, you know. And so there's still information you can get from the traditional lab work that would lead you to be able to understand how to adjust a person's nutrition program, you know, using these kinds of nutrients. And the heavy hitter list, and you know, there's we're teaching that we're next year we're going to teach this it's basically cardiovascular health and primary care course, and I'm going to be partnering with these primary care doctors to teach this class. And in their practices, they don't do a lot of lab testing. It's interesting. They do general recommendations for nutrition based on more of a conventional medical assessment, and the general recommendations that pretty much every patient ends up being on. Now, of course, I personally like to do the labs, but these primary care doctors don't. Magnesium, vitamin D, B vitamins, and omega-3s, and a multi. And I think the reason why the primary care doctors are so comfortable with those products is because it's a list of, you know, the most well-researched nutrients you can imagine that help with cardiovascular disease prevention. So magnesium, vitamin D, B vitamins, omega-3s, and a multi, and maybe for extra protection, some CoQ10. Now, again, when you're doing general recommendations without labs, your dosing recommendations are going to be quite a bit lower. When you're doing the testing that I just showed you, and you can see exactly how much CoQ10 someone needs, you may bring their CoQ10 levels up to 600 milligrams a day or 800 milligrams a day. Whereas if you're doing a general recommendation without the functional medicine testing, it may be more like 100 milligrams once or twice a day. So it's the same thing with omega-3s. If you're running testing and you see omega-3s are low on the labs, you may use 4 grams a day of omega-3s. But if you are doing it without lab testing, you may just use a gram or two. So you can use the same kinds of products we use in the lab-based programs and non-lab-based programs. You just bring the dosages down to what would be a safe daily recommended amount. But those are the big ones: magnesium, vitamin D, B vitamins, omega-3s, and a multi. And if you really want some extra cardiovascular protection, you would add in CoQ10. Oh, here's a cell, just in case you forgot what a cell looks like. But what we're trying to do is protect the cell and make it work really well. That's really the goal here. And we're thinking about if that's happening and the cells are working well, the membranes are working well, the enzymes are working well, all these systems within the cell are working well, then we know that's going to have an impact on the organs themselves. And here's a healthy heart versus a heart surrounded by fat. So we clearly want to get body fat down and get visceral fat that surrounds and potentially damages organs down. And this is a big part of our work in metabolic health and mitochondrial health, looking at insulin and the insulin response and oxidative stress and inflammation, and all this that can add up to cause damage to the lining of the blood vessels. And by the way, I need to come up with a better analogy or metaphor or whatever you call it. Because do you guys have Zamboni machines there? You don't have a lot of ice rinks in Costa Rica, do you? Have you even know what a Zamboni machine is? Have you heard that? Yeah. So if you've ever watched a hockey game, maybe, but there's this machine that comes out in the middle of a hockey game and it polishes the ice. and it makes it super smooth and glassy. Maybe in the Olympics, you see that happening, and then the ice gets all kind of chalked up and the ice skates dig into the ice and there's, little pieces of, frozen water everywhere. It's not so nice. So when we think about the blood vessels themselves, and the concern here is that the blood vessels are going to get chalked up and damaged, just like an ice skating rink with a bunch of skaters going around it. And then you get inflammation and you get plaquing, and then you get these, this buildup of plaque, which if it breaks free can cause a heart attack or a stroke. And so when we think about, we want to have like a polisher or a smoother or something that takes all those rough edges and all that inflammation and oxidative stress out of the blood vessels. Okay, and what puts that inflammation into the blood vessels more than anything else is insulin resistance. So every time someone eats a huge amount of sugar or too many carbohydrates, their insulin levels get too high. They're getting inflammation in their blood vessels. So we want to counteract that damage that the insulin response can cause. And there's a whole bunch of ways that we try to do that. Now, obviously, you can do it with diet by putting people on a healthy, blood sugar balanced diet. And then as part of this damage that's occurring, we're also seeing damage to the mitochondria themselves. So now they're not producing energy as well as they should. There's a general energy decline. Mitochondria are damaged and not functioning well. And it's the aging and burning out and browning out of the mitochondria that leads to cellular aging, that leads to human aging, that leads to us dying younger than we really should. And so if we can get these cellular repair systems engaged, and we can get the blood vessels healed and repaired and polished up, and we can repair DNA, then you've got a really strong movement towards a healthier person that's going to live a longer time. I mean, I think that's really the goal. And it's not just living a longer time, but being healthy as you're living those years of your life, not living a longer time in an unhealthy state, right? That's not exactly what we want. So here's a nice blow up of the mitochondria and the pathways. So we consume carbohydrate. That glucose then gets converted into pyruvate and then to acetyl-CoA. It goes through the citric acid cycle and then the electron transport chain, and ultimately we make energy out of it, or ATP. We can also take fat and run it through the citric acid cycle and make ATP. And when we're thinking about mitochondrial health or mitochondrial function, we're thinking about how well are these enzymes working. Because each one of these steps that you see here in these different pathways involves an enzyme. And if those enzymes are damaged and they don't work very well, then the mitochondria don't work very well, and we cannot make energy inside the cells, and that's what leads to cells dying prematurely and us dying prematurely as well. So you can see the list of nutrients here that run these pathways, or can you? I was just gonna say you can see them, but I can't see them. So I'm gonna get my glasses out so I can see them. I'm 61 now. I don't know how old you guys are, but if you're my age, you probably need glasses too. All right, so here we go, up here. Pyruvate and lactate. You need B1, B2, B3, B5, and lipoic acid to take that pyruvate, to turn it into acetyl-CoA, to turn it into energy. You need carnitine to take fat and turn it into energy. Within the citric acid cycle itself, there's two things. Well, no, there's three things that are critical. My teacher, Richard Lord, used to make me say this to him over and over again, so I remember these very well. They are oxygen, magnesium, and CoQ10. Oxygen, magnesium, and CoQ10 make this citric acid cycle and the electron transport chain zoom along, hum along, work just perfectly. Now, oxygen, obviously, you don't take in a supplement form. Oxygen is just breathing. So we want people to breathe and exercise. And if they're not exercising, give them breathing exercises, get them moving. So oxygen, CoQ10, you use in a supplement form, 100 to 200 a day. And then magnesium in a supplement form, usually it's 200 to 400 a day on magnesium. So magnesium, CoQ10, and oxygen get the citric acid cycle and electron transport chain working properly. And then up here, to burn the carbohydrates and to burn the proteins, you need lipoic acid and B complex. Now, in my world, we test. So if you have high pyruvate, you get B vitamins and lipoic acid. If you have a problem with your citric acid cycle, you get magnesium and CoQ10. But honestly, If the person has any metabolic block or any hint of problem with insulin resistance, for example, they have too much fat around their abdomen, they're eating a high carb diet, they have a history of, family history of heart disease, they have high cholesterol, their glucose is creeping up. Any of those problems lets you know, even without the fancy functional medicine lab, you know this is a problem. So then you know, oh, okay, B complex, lipoic acid, CoQ10, magnesium, and oxygen. And oxygen is exercise and breathing. And shoo, now you've got a restoration of the mitochondria happening in real time. Now, the nice thing about testing is you can retest. So in our world, we test, we do a program for 6 months and then retest. If you're not doing the lab-based programs, you would try to track this, I guess, by looking at their glucose or making sure they're losing weight or their energy levels are better, those kinds of more subjective ways of tracking. But the idea is that if you understand these metabolic pathways in the mitochondria, you can see where the nutrients are that are required, support them, and get this system working properly. It's not as complicated as it would seem, and in fact, it's really biochemistry that's just using applied nutrition. Can you do this with food? Not anymore. I don't think so. I think you could do this with food maybe a couple hundred years ago. But the reason why you can't really do this with food now is what we started the conversation off with. What's damaging these structures, these mitochondria in the body? What is damaging them? It's oxidative stress from environmental toxins. And in particularly this enzyme here, succinate dehydrogenase, this one down here, very susceptible to damage from environmental toxins, heavy metals, chemicals. And so all of us now are being exposed to thousands of chemicals, some heavy metals from air, food, and water. And so our mitochondria are being damaged on a regular basis. And you can't really eat your way out of that. I don't think there's enough broccoli that you could consume that you're going to get enough antioxidants to make the equation work anymore. So unfortunately, because we've, made a mess of this planet and it's quite a toxic place to live, we need some extra support to keep our mitochondria working right. Let's see here. Insulin resistance, I'm assuming you all are familiar with that term in general. But insulin resistance, in a sense, is the beginning of the end, right? It's the beginning of oxidative stress. It's the beginning of inflammation. It's the beginning of blood vessel damage. And we want to reverse people out of that. And the causes are obvious: obesity, visceral fat, high sugar, high processed food diets, absolute physical inactivity, inflammation, again, from bad diet and stress, lack of sleep. All these things add up to us having a damaged metabolism. So when we say insulin resistance, we go back to this diagram, it means that this pathway of glucose into the citric acid cycle is broken. So specifically just for insulin resistance, you treat with thiamine or B1. We just looked this yesterday in class, 200 to 300 milligrams a day of thiamine. It's quite a bit of thiamine, but really works well. So B complex plus some extra thiamine and lipoic acid. Usually around 600 a day lipoic acid plus a B complex plus an extra couple hundred thiamine. That'll get this enzyme system working here and start to reverse the insulin resistance so things can flow. So the energy can flow into the citric acid cycle again. And of course, as you're doing that on the supplement side, you're also doing, the lifestyle change. So we're trying to get people off of highly processed foods, get them to reduce their sugar, get them to be physically active. And if we can combine the nutritional programs and supplements with the lifestyle change, then you see very rapid improvements in people's health. If you're just doing lifestyle change alone, you can still see benefit for sure. And if you're just doing supplements alone, you see some benefit. But when you combine the supplements and the lifestyle at the same time, people change in a matter of weeks or months, and they get excited about the change. You're going to get excited about the change. And it's just a much easier way to motivate people. If they have to do all these things just with lifestyle alone, it's hard. The supplements really speed things up like dramatically. And if you only do supplements, they'll work, but then they just have to take the supplements forever, and that's not really the point. We're not trying to create people that are addicted to supplements to feel good. So combining the lifestyle with the supplement protocols is really the way to make this work. So now we think of insulin resistance, it starts in muscle tissue. So when you eat a meal, this is hard to believe, but you should look this up if you don't believe me, because I didn't believe this when I first heard it. The muscle itself, muscle tissue itself, is responsible for the uptake of like 80 to 90% of glucose after you eat a meal. Can you believe that? And so insulin resistance actually starts in muscle tissue. But guess what? If you don't have enough muscle on your body, then this whole thing doesn't work. So there's no substitute for exercise in this, you know? You can't fake muscle tissue. You can't take muscle tissue in a pill. You just have to be physically active in order for this to work. Now, eventually, once this is a diagram here, you can see like the lean and young muscle fiber. And then here we have the obese person with all the disgusting globs of fat surrounding their muscle tissue. I mean, that's basically insulin resistance. And then down here, you can see a healthy liver and a liver that's starting to get fatty. After the muscle starts to get fatty and insulin resistant, then the liver, and then there's even a version of insulin resistance of the brain, okay, where your brain starts to have these problems as well. So once that kicks in, once that insulin resistance kicks in, then we're, assuming that these problems that I've been talking about up here are all present. So let's go through them one at a time. You have an increase of reactive oxygen species. That means that there's an increase in oxidative stress. So you counteract that with antioxidants like lipoic acid, CoQ10, resveratrol. All three of them, if they have a lot of oxidative stress. We talked about impaired glucose oxidation. That's your B vitamins and lipoic acid, remember, from the glucose pathway. Impaired fatty acid oxidation, you can use carnitine to resolve that. And once you get all these systems working again, you can reduce and eliminate insulin resistance with the combination of the products that we're talking about and things like exercise and eating better. And it is shocking how well this works. And this is exactly what is going to preserve lifespan and health span. The better physical condition your mitochondria are in, the longer the person's going to live. And again, a lot of this comes back to muscle tissue. You can't really have a longevity program unless I mean, the main feature of a longevity program is going to be, how much muscle tissue does a person have? How strong are they? How much do they exercise? And you don't have to be like a weightlifter, like you're going to be in CrossFit or something. You just need to be, lifting weights maybe 3 times a week for 20 minutes. It's not a life commitment to a life in the gym, but you do need 3 times a week, 20 minutes or more of strength training in order for this to really work. Now, here's a little blow up diagram here of what we're talking about. So here's your glucose molecule outside the cell. Now it's coming inside the cell, and we're trying to convert it into pyruvate so that it goes into the mitochondria and we make energy. That's the whole process of glycolysis. So again, this is regulated by thiamine, the other B vitamins, and lipoic acid. When we're exercising a lot, that pyruvate can convert into lactate. Okay, and that's a whole other thing. We also can measure lactate levels, and lactate can go back to pyruvate. It can go back and forth. And it turns out that, I don't know, I'm sure you guys learned the same thing that we did, but when we learned in school was that high lactic acid or high lactate was bad, and high lactic acid or high lactate was the reason why muscles get sore after you work out. Turns out none of that is true. Turns out that muscle soreness mostly comes because of oxidative stress, and it turns out lactate, you won't believe this. If you haven't heard this yet, this is going to shock you. You ready for this? Lactate is a preferred fuel. Lactate is a preferred fuel for the brain and heart. So there's a researcher at UC Berkeley named George Brooks at Berkeley, who spent his whole career looking at lactate. And it turns out it's actually a very good thing to have lactate. Not too much of it, right? But exercise that generates lactic acid, that lactate becomes the preferred fuel supply for your heart and brain. It's kind of surprising. So one of the key aspects of any longevity program is being able to repair and rebuild, whether it's mitochondria or mitochondrial enzymes or heart tissue, liver tissue, whatever cells you need to repair and rebuild. And we have to have amino acids present in order for this kind of cellular repair to happen. So you can, and a big part of longevity in just general health is to stimulate a process called mTOR, which causes protein synthesis and occasionally to inhibit the process of mTOR so that you can go through autophagy and break things down like mitochondria or damaged or old or dead cells, right? Or senescent cells. You want to be able to break things down, right? And so you want an alternating effect of stimulating mTOR to rebuild and repair, but then some periods of time where mTOR is inhibited so you can break down mitochondria, break down damaged cells, break down tissues that need to be broken down so they can be recycled. You can stimulate mTOR with free-form amino acids, and you can inhibit mTOR with fasting. So very popular right now. Usually in the States, they call it intermittent fasting, but basically it means, not eating 3 meals a day. And for most people, it means eating either 1 or 2 meals a day in order to reduce mTOR, to stimulate autophagy, so all the damaged mitochondria, damaged cells are broken down. But then we need to also stimulate mTOR periodically with amino acids from protein or amino acids from amino acid powders. And here's a couple slides on that. So protein misfolding. So when you get, one of the things that really causes us to age is that proteins misfold. And if they misfold and they're not taken away, broken down, and recycled, then they cause a lot of problems. So you want this autophagy process to go on quite frequently. And again, this means intermittent fasting. And you can take it to an extreme. I mean, I'm a little extreme with this. 2 days a week, every Monday and Tuesday, I only eat 1 meal. Thankfully, today is Wednesday, so I can eat twice today. But it works really well. If you ever want to try this, just take a day or two a week and just eat 1 meal on those days. You'll be amazed. By the time you get to 18 hours without eating, you're in autophagy and mitophagy. You're going to feel it. It feels really strange. Even though I've been doing this for a long time, I can still tell. I can look at I don't even need to watch. I can tell exactly when it's 18 hours because you get this like something's wrong with feeling. And what it is your body starting to recycle and break down large protein aggregates and damaged organelles. And you can very clearly feel this process happening. What happens the next day is you feel like 1,000 times better than you felt in weeks. So it may be a little rough when you're going through that 18-hour fast period, trying to hang in there until, you're at the 24-hour period or 20 hours, whatever it is that you're doing, but it makes a huge difference in terms of how you feel. And we want to make sure we do that, okay? And another classic way that we look at, protecting the heart, protecting the cardiovascular system is by stimulating heat shock proteins. And usually this is done with a sauna, typically. I mean, you could do it with exercise too, obviously, but usually this is done with a sauna. So in sauna, we stimulate these heat shock proteins, and they are like the hospital or ER system or ambulances of the body, right? They start to stimulate this whole breakdown process as well. So it's a very effective way to deal with misfolded proteins. So again, autophagy, either generated by fasting periodically or by heat shock proteins, is going to help your body grab these misfolded proteins and break them down. And let's see if you can see it here. Here's a folded protein at the top. Here it's unfolded. There's your heat shock proteins there. Now it's refolded thanks to you taking a sauna. You didn't take the sauna, you didn't do your fasting. You've got the misfolded protein that then comes together with other misfolded proteins and these aggregates, and that can cause problems like Alzheimer's. Not a good thing. You don't want these in your brain, right? You want to get these misfolded proteins can build up and cause problems. So it's just another reason protecting your brain, protecting your heart, using simple things like autophagy. And if the person, I mean, eating 1 meal a day is pretty extreme, I think. So, but maybe twice a week they eat 2 meals a day, which is maybe they just skip breakfast. You don't have to make it too crazy. Even if they do a fast from dinner time until the next day at lunch, even doing that a couple days a week is enough to make a big difference. We're not going to talk a lot about amino acid testing. I just want to mention it, that you can test amino acids, and it's a really great lab, but we're not going to get into that too much tonight. I want to leave some time for questions, and I'm going to flip through that lab test again in a second, but I want to just cover the cell danger response. We have about 10 or 15 minutes left, and then a little bit on exercise, okay? So this is an important thing to know about, and you may want to read about this on your own. There's a Dr. Navio, and he's based out of UC San Diego, and he's a genetics researcher that is focused on mitochondrial health and function. And he wrote some papers quite a few years ago now that were quite inspirational for a lot of people on what he calls the cell danger response, the cell danger response. He's done quite a bit of research on this, and it's pretty interesting. So the cell danger response refers to what the mitochondria do when they're faced with some kind of danger. And that danger could be a chemical or a heavy metal. That danger could be too much sugar. That danger could be an infection, a viral infection, like a COVID type problem, could be a parasitic or gut infection. But when the mitochondria are sense that the body is in danger or under attack, there's a universal response that mitochondria have um, to all these dangers, which Navio calls the cell danger response. Again, it's cell danger response. If you want to read about that, you can Google it. And what the mitochondria do is quite interesting. They're numbered out here, but let me just go through the important ones. One of the things, so in general, we think of mitochondria as taking oxygen and using that oxygen to make energy. And we eat our food, we break it down, the citric acid cycle I just showed, electron transport chain, oxygen comes in and we make energy. When the cell danger response is kicked into gear, we take that oxygen and instead of making energy, we use it to actually generate oxidative stress in the mitochondria itself and in the cell. Your body is creating this damaging inflammatory oxidative stress. In addition to that, the mitochondria produce inflammatory fatty acids, and they cram those fatty acids, those inflammatory fatty acids, into membranes. This is a self-destructive process. The mitochondria has decided the cell is in danger, and it's going to increase oxidative stress and increase inflammation. This is the worst thing that could happen for your cardiovascular system. And this happens whatever the insult is. It could be a viral infection, it could be an environmental toxin. It's a universal response. It's pretty profound. And so if we get stuck in this response and we're continually making oxidative stress and making these inflammatory fatty acids, that's going to greatly reduce your health and your lifespan dramatically. And so one of the things about Navio's work is we want to look at the health of the mitochondria and break this cell danger response out so the body starts to go back into a healing response. And we do that with the same exact supplements that we were talking about before: magnesium, vitamin D, B vitamins, CoQ10, omega-3s, lipoic acid, resveratrol. It's always the same kinds of things because think about it. What we're trying to solve for here are inflammatory fatty acids in membranes. That's your omega-3s and CoQ10. Remember in the very beginning, I said omega-3s help the membranes work better. The CoQ10 and vitamin E are fat-soluble antioxidants that protect the membrane. For the general oxidative stress, you can use things like resveratrol and vitamin C. And then, of course, the mitochondria need the magnesium and B vitamins to operate properly. So there's a lot you can do to help correct that. Now, when we're looking at overall programs and we want to include what's going to really help support the cardiovascular system in terms of exercise, you want to be able to integrate 3 different kinds of exercise. Some high intensity exercise, not a lot. Some zone 2 training, a couple hours a week, and then resistance training or strength training 3 times a week. And it sounds a little overwhelming, but I mean, I've been doing this. I'm pretty busy. I have like a job and kids and a car that's always breaking down. I have a pretty busy lifestyle, and I'm still able to do this. I do high intensity interval training 3 times a week with a kettlebell. It takes me 6 minutes. 6 minutes 3 times a week. It's not very difficult. I do it first thing in the morning, right when I wake up, every other day. So 6 minutes. And there's my high intensity done. Zone 2 training, I walk the dog, ride my bike, jog around a few hours a week, get that in. And then resistance training, I have a gym. I go to the gym 3 times a week for 20 or 30 minutes and get that all done. So I don't know, if you average it all together, it's probably 5-6 hours a week of exercise at the most, maybe even less if you want to be super efficient about it. But this is what's essential for the mitochondria to start to grow and repair. And as I talked about earlier, you can't really get any of these programs to work if you're not doing the exercise. Now, a lot of the patients that we work with are not ready to exercise, and it can easily take somebody a year or two until they're at the point where they can exercise regularly. I understand that. But we want to ultimately have that as a goal that we're trying to drive them towards. And this is another slide just on how important muscle is there. But I'm going to leave a little bit of time at the end here for questions. I want to show the lab one more time. For those that came late, we have our next big class coming up in November is on hormones and immune function. If you guys are interested in that, it's part of my longevity training. And I was going to show the lab one time for a minute or two. You guys can type in questions if you have any, just so you can see how you can test people. And hopefully we're going to stimulate some of you to do some testing. I want to show you here on the lab how this all works. So we talked about glycolysis. And again, here you can see pyruvic acid, lactic acid right there on the test. If these are high, look how easy they make it. They even tell you right on the lab. If these are high, look, B1, B2, B3, B5, lipoic acid. That's what gets that enzyme to work, the pyruvate dehydrogenase enzyme. If the lactate dehydrogenase enzyme is messed up, lactic acid is high, use B3. So again, it's right there. The Krebs cycle we talked about, that's your CoQ10 and magnesium support. Fatty acid oxidation for burning fat, that's carnitine. I'm just going to show a few of these. You can analyze all the B vitamins here to see if there's a B vitamin deficiency. That whole section of the test will tell you about the Bs. They also measure individual B vitamins, B12, folate, B6, biotin. They measure catecholamines, dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, the metabolites, as well as metabolites for serotonin, as well as neuroinflammation. And then oxidative damage. We talked a lot about this. This is 8-OHDG. This is the marker for DNA damage. 8 is bad. You want that down below a 4. They measure toxin exposure, glutathione status. If glutathione markers are off, glutathione is the most important antioxidant in the body. We use glutathione in almost all these programs. So this just gives you a general idea of testing that you can do so you can see all these things. It's not that expensive. You can do the testing every 6 months or every year so you get a general sense of how you want to develop programs. And if you're not doing that yet, you're not ready to do the lab testing, then you just think about what I said the typical primary care doctor in the US is doing now for cardiovascular disease prevention, which is, and then this is just based on, there's so much research on these specific products that it's easy to recommend. Magnesium, vitamin D, B vitamins, omega-3s, and if you really want to make it stronger, some CoQ10. Pretty straightforward. 4 or 5 supplements make a huge difference for people in terms of how they're feeling. Oh, and then we're going to end on this final thought. So the polisher for the blood vessels, the way that you get the blood vessels smooth and polished and just pristine and brand new looking is with a support for nitric oxide. And Designs has this product, I use this quite a bit, called Nox Synergy. Okay, and that's designed to repair endothelial lining tissue and get blood vessels working great. And nitric oxide support like Nox Synergy works great for men with erectile dysfunction, women that have trouble sexually as well. It gets blood flow going really well to the area. We use it with a lot of professional athletes that want to be able to perform better on their bicycle, not sexual performance, but like bicycle performance or running performance. And then anyone who's worried about their heart and blood vessels in any way, something like the Nox Synergy, it's very effective. I mean, it works in a matter of days or weeks to improve functioning in the blood vessels. It's pretty amazing product if you guys want to play around with that. And you don't need any lab test to use that product. It's just sort of general strengthening, tonifying, cleaning up of the blood vessels. All right, so I'm going to open it up for questions in the last few minutes here.
Thank you, Dr. Dan. Thank you very, very much for all this great information. We do have a few questions here. One of our questions is, what do you think of methylene blue? Is this a product that you use on your practice?
Yeah, it's becoming really popular now for mitochondrial repair, right? I don't use it in my practice yet. but it's definitely becoming very popular. I have nothing against it. It's just not part of my general protocols yet.
Hmm. All right. Um, a general question says, where in all this can we include grounding, sun exposure, proper hydration, and breath techniques?
Well, if you want to step back and look at the bigger picture, I don't really know if I have slides on this or not. Let me see. Hang on a second. Let's go back to the very beginning because I kind of skipped over that part a little bit. Uh, Here. Here's a good way to see it. Yeah, here. So, what is it that throws off the cardiometabolic system in the first place? It's mental, emotional stress, um, lack of exercise, just eating horribly, and lack of sleep. And sleep is dependent on our exposure to light and dark cycles. So, waking up when the sun comes up, going to bed a few hours after it's dark, those kinds of things. Exercise is, blood sugar regulation, blood sugar control. I mean, sorry, diet, blood sugar regulation, blood sugar control. Exercise, I just went over, those are the things you have to do. And then on the emotional, spiritual side, it's probably the most important part of this whole equation. Because you certainly don't want somebody who's living a long life and is emotionally and spiritually disconnected. That doesn't make any sense at all, right? That'd be kind of stupid. You'd have all these really healthy, unhappy, spiritually bereft people walking around. So I think the emotional and spiritual component or grounding or however you want to call it, it's kind of the whole reason why we're doing this, right? Is to be physically healthy so we can have a full emotional and spiritual, experience in this lifetime, you know? So,
Mhm.
and different doctors approach that different ways. Some doctors may be explicit and say, here's your grounding exercise, your energy balancing exercise, or your emotional health exercise or your breathing exercise or whatever. And then sometimes it's approached more obliquely, Um, in other words, sometimes it's the first part of the first thing that people do. In my practice, I usually wait until people are a little bit physically healthier and I feel like I've gotten to know them a little bit. And then I'll say, okay, well, let's really start to take this next step and look at your breathing, your energy systems, your spiritual connection. There are many functional medicine doctors who do that on the first consultation. I just don't. I respect the ones that do. I don't know, I wait a little bit before I broach those subjects with people because I want them to physically feel better first and kind of buy into it before I get esoteric with them or, more abstract.
Yeah, it seems like in our personal experience and with all the training that I have had with you, it is really important when it comes also to adrenal function balancing, right? So that we can, not only make people feel better, but also become more sensitive to all these other practices that we will add, such as the breathing and the sleeping and all these practices. And it all has to come with adrenal glands that are functioning properly, right? Because
Yeah,
there's another question along the same line that says, how about if the danger is imaginary, like stress? There's a
doesn't
lot
matter.
out.
It doesn't
Mhm.
matter. Like we were this isn't funny, but we were on a walk the other night and this is a horrible thing to admit, but I made a sound like a bear. And there's no bears anywhere near where we are, but I really scared the person that I was walking with, and it was kind of a mean thing to do. But there I was trying to be funny, but it didn't work out very well. And the thing is that that person thought that there was actually a bear there, which was ridiculous because there's no bears around. But that imagined bear was just as stressful to that person's system as if there had been a real bear chasing them, ripping their body apart. And so the most of the stresses, I'd say 99% of the stresses that we are under in modern life are completely imagined. It's our
Mhm.
thoughts generating feelings and emotions that are not based in any reality, and they're based on some future concern, some concern about the future, some thing from the past that's motivating us. And if we can stay in the present moment, then those kinds of imaginary, you know, mental health problems that we make up just disappear. And that's, I think, one of the big practices that we try to teach people is how to be in the present moment so the person is not dominated by their emotions and fears and things that are from the past or future, you know.
Hmm.
That's pretty important. And that's kind of the whole point of the adrenal programs that you mentioned is to just calm people down and get them out of that, you know, intense fight or flight state.
Hmm. Correctly. All right. Talking about the cell danger response, the question is, can it be measured directly?
Yeah, so Dr. Navio's whole career is based on looking at the cell danger response. Let me show you. Uh, and it's quite interesting. Let me see. Let me just show you his name in the paper here. I should have it here. And you can look up these papers and read about them because it's quite. Uh, oh, yeah, this is a review of the paper. But the answer is yes. He's been spending his whole career uh, here. This is from Navio's paper. Oh, here, I don't know if you can see it. It says metabolic features of the cell danger response in the journal Mitochondrion. But you can Google that. You can pull it up online. But this is a diagram from that paper, and he's able to measure what he calls CDR1, 2, and 3, and figure out what phase that person is in. So when we get this stress, again, this could be imaginary stress or real stress. It could be an imagined bear or a real bear or a toxin or a viral infection. We go into CDR1, and that's when I was describing the mitochondria do this sort of suicide, you know, thing. But understandably so, because the cell that's infected wants to kill itself, and it wants to warn the surrounding cells, hey, over here, I'm dying. I've got a virus. You guys better be careful. So it dumps out all its ATP, and the surrounding cells see all this ATP floating around. They're like, wait a minute, what's going on over there? There's something bad going on. So this is a warning system. Then we're supposed to go through the CDR2, which is when we start to repair. And then CDR3, now the cells have repaired, and now they're starting to re-communicate. They're starting to establish communication links with each other again. So you have CDR1, where the damage is. CDR2 is the repair process. And CDR3, there's this restoration of the communication between cells. And where does that happen? A lot of that happens through the membranes, right? We talked about. And so here you can see, based on the CDR1, 2, or 3, there's different kinds of symptoms that pop up. So CDR1 is characterized by allergies, asthma, chronic infections. CDR2, you think more about metabolic syndrome, like we're talking about today. CDR3, people are pretty sick. Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, those kinds of problems. And then Navio's idea is that we want to see which CDR they're stuck in, and then get them out of that and push them through so they start to repair. Because the top of this here, after CDR3, it's a reset back to a normal cellular function. And this happens all the time, right? Let's say if I got sick, let's say I got on a plane tomorrow and I got a viral infection, I would go through CDR1, 2, and 3, hopefully in like a week. And then I would be better. I'd get sick, I'd feel bad for a few days and get better. But what we're concerned about patients is they get stuck in CDR1. They don't move forward. Or they get stuck in CDR2 and they don't move forward. Or the worst case scenario is they get stuck in CDR3 and they're frozen in there. And we then want to push them on. And how do we do that? That's the whole explanation I was giving about mitochondrial repair. That's why we're
Mhm.
doing the mitochondrial repair. We're trying to get them through these different phases of healing so they can get back to the normal cycle again. That's a really great model. And his papers are incredible if you guys want to read more about it.
Mhm. Oh, perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We have another question, and it says, are there studies of more than 10 years of supplementation with at least 6 supplements to determine if there are side effects?
Well, nobody studies anything for 10 years. I don't, well, that's not true. I guess you could have these long-term outcome studies, but they're not going to be on supplements. They're going to be on things like diet and exercise, like the Framingham study, right? I mean, that went on for
Mhm.
decades. But I don't
Mhm.
think anybody studies supplements, for decades.
Not that we've heard of, At least I
No,
haven't
no,
either.
yeah, I don't think that's going to happen in our lifetimes. Probably not.
And what about thinking about the reality is supplements are mostly, nutrients that your body needs all the time. And some of them are even, made by your body themselves. So what about the toxicity? I mean, what is the risk of toxicity? We rarely see side effects from the use of supplements unless we overdose or unless there's, very specific situations. But we see more that, as related to a use of medicinal plants, that there could be, idiosyncratic reactions, but not
Yes,
symptoms themselves.
it depends on how you're dosing the person.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're using like generic dosages, like the typical, like I was saying, magnesium, vitamin D, B vitamins, CoQ10, omega 3s, if you're using like 1 or 2 grams a day of omega 3, 100 a day of CoQ10, one B complex, maybe 4,000 IUs a day of vitamin D, and 2 to 400 milligrams a day of magnesium. I mean, all those have been studied widely, and there's no way that those are going to cause problems in anybody. But what I'm more interested in is not like daily stuff that you could just look up online and take. But I'm more interested in therapeutic treatments where we do the lab testing, we see that you're low in glutathione, and then we, bring your glutathione levels up. And that's not going to happen with a really low dose, but it also only happens for a short period of time based on the lab. So you do the lab test, you see there's low glutathione, you give glutathione for 3 to 6 months, you stop and redo the test. And as soon as the glutathione levels are normal, you stop the therapeutic dose. That's what I'm most interested in. But I'm trying to present this talk tonight for people that aren't doing labs yet. And for that, in that case, you just keep the dosages, low within the realm of what the research shows is safe. And
Mm-hmm.
there's no way. I mean, think about it. You could think about it in the reverse. There is no 10-year experiment using those 5 supplements, but there's like a 50-year experiment on what happens when you're deficient in those things. That's called the
That's
United
true.
States of America. Okay. So,
Mhm.
like every American, if you look at the statistics, almost every American is low in magnesium, vitamin D, omega 3s, and antioxidants. Like it's more than
Oh,
half of
same
the
here.
population.
Exactly,
And
same
what's
here.
happened to us? Okay, are we doing great? Are we fit? Do we look like everybody in Sweden looks? I don't think so. We're all fat. We're all depressed. We're all tired. Everybody's dying of all kinds of horrible. Our response to COVID was like the worst in the world. So what you're seeing in the United States is like a 50-year experiment in what happens when you destroy a whole population's metabolic health, and you can see, and they measure this, the levels of nutrients in our bodies in the United States. And these deficiencies like magnesium and vitamin D are, it's more than half of the population have these now. So it's not a good outcome, and then just to answer the question better though, and this is a quote from Dr. Richard Lord, every nutrient can be a toxicant. You can take too much vitamin D. I've done it. I did a vitamin D test once and my levels were like 127. I was like, oops. I was like, I should have tested, and you know why that happened? This doctor, my doctor told me to take vitamin D and I started taking it. And he told me to retest in 3 months. And what did I do? I waited for like a year and a half to retest. How stupid is that? I teach this stuff every day. I was too busy to go get my blood drawn. I was feeling so good, I didn't need to do it. And then I redid my vitamin D and it was high. So if you listen to your doctor and you retest every 3 or 6 months, you're never going to run into these toxicity problems because you're analyzing as you go. And as soon as my vitamin D levels were normal, he would have told me to stop. So that's a good
And did you
example.
get it? Did you experience any side effects?
No, I felt great. That was the
Yeah.
problem. Is I was feeling so good. I was like, this is really working. I'm just going to keep taking this forever. And I
Mm-hmm.
did, and I didn't do the test. I was so
Mm-hmm.
stupid. I can't believe that. But I just did this like 3 or 4 years ago, just so you know. Been in this industry for 35 years. But if your doctor tells you to do a test in 3 months or 6 months, just listen to them and just track this carefully, and you won't have problems.
Mm-hmm. Here in our chat, there's a link that one of our participants shared about a 11-year study, but it was a follow-up with the use of a multivitamin. And then we also don't know what quality of multivitamin it was, right? And what quality of ingredients. We need to read the study in order to get more information, but it's there. Dr.
Yeah,
Frank,
well,
that you asked about it, here's a study that someone of us shared, and it's about multivitamins.
yeah. And the real answer to the question is if you're doing all this based on labs, you're never going to screw somebody up.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
mean, if you're doing an organic acids profile, even just once a year, along with an amino acid test and maybe a little bit of blood work for things like you can do the omega-3 index, a vitamin D level, some antioxidant testing, and then an organic acids test. If you do that once a year and then you make a recommendation on supplements based on those tests and you redo them every 6 months or every year, you won't have these toxicity
Hmm.
problems because as soon
Yeah,
as your pyruvic acid is better, you stop all the B vitamins and lipoic acid, right? So these are short-term therapeutic programs based on labs.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, the difference between therapeutic dosaging and then, maintenance doses. That's,
yeah,
and it's important to say that all of these labs are available in our country. We can do everything, through there's a couple of labs who will ship out for GI maps, for organic acid testing, for omega-3 index. All of this is, well, this is what part of what I do on my daily basis here at the office.
it's the next level. I think it really is. It's a lab-guided nutrition, and it takes all the guesswork out of it.
Yeah. And it's not easy. I mean, I trained with Dr. Dan for over a year, and it feels like, I could do it for 5 more years until
It's
I
a lot,
master. I mean, it's so complicated.
but it's fun though. Don't you like it?
Yeah, it is. It is
Yeah.
fun, and then you can see the difference in your patient's response.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. And the very last question is about homocysteine.
Oh
About
yeah.
how much do you use it as a marker to evaluate B vitamin deficiencies?
Yeah, that's a key marker. So let's look at that real quick here. Well, first of all, on this test here, so let me, can we do like 5 minutes on this or 4 minutes maybe? Is that
Yeah, go
okay?
ahead.
Okay.
Please do.
So
Mhm.
you see the glutathione section of the test there. We're going to come back to that, but you test for glutathione based on those markers. And then you'll also see there's a methylation portion of the test, B12, folate, and B6. Those are the products that relate to methylation, B12, folate, and B6. We're measuring for each of those. So we're measuring for glutathione and we're testing for methylation. And then you combine that with this here. So here's your homocysteine. And this cycle up here is the methylation cycle, which is largely determined by B6, B12, folate, betaine, and choline. Choline is not on this diagram, but B6, B12, folate, betaine, and choline. So you measure homocysteine. If it's high, then you want to know the status of B6, B12, and folate, which is on the test that I just showed. And then you can use B6, B12, and folate to lower the homocysteine. The
Even
methylation cycle,
our B
yeah,
complex has betaine included.
yeah, and the choline too, I think.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. So it's an all-in-one. If you use the B Supreme from Designs, you get all these covered. Whoever designed that was smart. And then over here is your glutathione. That's the master antioxidant. So it's very strongly linked to methylation. So when we're under oxidative stress, this would be the classic cardiovascular disease problem. Methylation decreases and we increase our production of glutathione, obviously to reduce the oxidative stress. So oxidative stress causes a decrease in methylation. That's when homocysteine goes up, and an increase in glutathione production. So as part of analyzing methylation, you can also support glutathione at the same time. So it's B6, B12, folate, betaine, choline. They have it all in that B Supreme product. And then you would add glutathione in. And all this you would track with the labs like homocysteine. You can also measure, as I showed, B6, B12, and folate. And we looked earlier, and you can see you can test for glutathione itself.
Hmm. And what level do you think is optimal of homocysteine in blood? Is it after seven or higher than seven, lower than seven? I've heard nines. That's the number that I've heard most. What do you think is the optimal range?
Yeah, I think somewhere around 9.
Hmm.
It's on the, let me pull up, let's see if I can pull up one of these. It's on, this is, I don't think this is a test you guys have there, but there's something called an ion panel. Let me see. And this will show you, it's not to show you this exact test itself, but just the idea of looking at all these things. Let me show. Uh, Here. Oh, sorry, I can't. It's not popping up for some reason. Ion panels and cases. Here we go. Is that going to work? There we go. My computer's low. So here we go. So this is not the exact test that you would use, but just to show you, what you can measure. So here you can measure all the amino acids. I don't think you guys have this in Costa Rica yet, but
We have Genova. Yeah, we do.
oh, you do? Oh, okay. So you could do all the amino acids, so you're not wondering about what we're talking about. Um, and they have these grouped really nicely on this particular test.
Not that
Here,
I've ever used it,
so you can, it includes
but I know it's
homocysteine.
available. Mhm.
So homocysteine right there, you want it around, like you were saying, 8 or 9, somewhere in that range. It does the heavy metals, it does the minerals like potassium, magnesium. And then here, we were just talking about this, it measures CoQ10 levels. You can see all that. It measures lipid peroxides, that's the damage to lipids. There's your 8-OHTG, that's your damage to DNA. It measures vitamin D. So you've got all that together. It looks at all the fatty acids, omega-3s, omega-6s, and then all the organic acids. So and again, I'm not showing this for this specific test itself, but you can see that you run a whole series of panels like that, and then you can put together, is it an amino acid? Is it a vitamin problem? Is it homocysteine? Is it vitamin D? And create a program based on the lab, and then redo the tests, every 6 months or a year to track people.
All right. Perfect. I think we're done with questions
Thank you.
at the moment. Thank you
Yeah,
very much, Dr. Dan. Once again, it's so great to see you again.
yeah, I appreciate it very much. Let's
Yeah,
keep in
thank you
touch.
so much, and thank you for a todos ustedes por habernos acompañado esta noche y esperamos contar más con más oportunidades el próximo año. We hope to see you again next year, and hopefully we'll see you live here in Costa Rica
Absolutely. Looking
soon.
forward to that.
All right, thank you so much.
All
You
right.
have a great night. Gracias a todos, muchas gracias.